Hey, welcome back, everybody, to the Web3 Game Development live stream. I am live here from Denver, where we are having the Eth Denver conference. I'm going to talk to a ton of game studios and people who are excited about this market. But today, I've got a guest who has been at the forefront of this for years now, and that's John Linden from Mythical Games. John, welcome.
Hey, thanks, man. Thanks for having me. Excited to talk about what's coming. Yeah.
Awesome. So my name's Jon Radoff. I'm the CEO of Beamable, and this is my stream. And I've got Oscar, who's helping us out on the production side. He's going to queue up the videos and keep things moving. As always, this is a live stream. So if you post comments, that gives us an opportunity to bring your comments and questions right into the conversation. Even beyond that, if you want to join us live, that's always an option too. Oscar can monitor the DMs. He'll see if you've got something you can bring to the conversation that's relevant. If you do, just let him know and we'll send you a StreamYard link. You can actually join live. So that's the cool thing about this format. So John, let's just kick things off a little bit just to give people some context here. What have you done in gaming before? How did you come into Web3? Why this of all the things you could be doing?
Awesome. Well, first of all, congrats on the fundraise, by the way. That's never an easy task. I was glad to see that was finalized and done on your guys' end. So congrats on that. Yeah, why are we doing this? That's always a good question. Now, I've been in the game industry for a long time. Originally started off as a studio at Activision Blizzard, so more traditional PC console games, the Call of Duty franchise, eventually the Skylanders franchise we were playing with as well. Left Activision after about 5 years, 5 or 6 years. And had a mobile game company called Seismic Games. We did a lot of great mobile projects, mostly branded IP. So we worked, obviously, our biggest one was Marvel Strike Force. We also did a Blade Runner VR game with Google and Alcon Entertainment. We built the Millennium Falcon ride for Disneyland. A lot of fun branded things there, Magic the Gathering game, and then sold that to Niantic in 2018. And really what we were looking at, John, is that there are a couple things. I kind of got in the bug pretty early. And really what happened is kind of 2016, 2017, really started to watch the space. And these little things called crypto kitties had come out. And I ended up dropping $600 on 2D images of cats. And I'm kind of like, why did I just do that? That's not my normal behavior. And that was really when it kind of sparked the concept of digital assets around having, the ability to sell at a loss, sell at a profit, give it away, burn it, whatever you want to do. That was a very powerful construct. And at the same time, also, I remember you still have a little bit when you trying to send Ethereum to somebody, you're holding your breath for 45 seconds to hope it shows up on the other side, right? Because it was very complicated. So I felt like it was early space, but it was some things that could really solve a lot of the problems we've been seeing in gaming for decades, right? And that was really the concept of Mythical. Is how do we build a platform to really take this tech stack and bring it into new game economies? And I think it's been a long 6 or 7 years now, but I think we've made some great progress, and I think we're just at that inflection point now of really making huge impacts. I think we already are making impacts, but now I think it's going to go to just some astronomical levels over the next couple of years.
So at Beamable, it's given me this unique opportunity just to talk to a ton of game studios at all stages of their development, people who are just at the idea stage all the way up to folks like you who are really getting legitimate scale from not just from a Web3 standpoint, but like a game industry standpoint. So I talked to a lot of these guys. Scale has been elusive for a lot of developers in this space so far. What do you think the impediments have been, and how has Mythical broken through that? Like, just to, again, make sure everyone is fully aware of what we're talking about here. Like, you've got a game called NFL Rivals. You've got a FIFA game on the way, which is probably arguably bigger globally than even the NFL is. Like, these are games that have really significant usership behind them.
Yep. Yeah, so I think you're talking scale of user game economy scale, or not technical scale, right? Okay.
All of the above, but when I talk about a business, really about like how many people are playing these things.
Yeah. So I mean, like I said, we're seeing hundreds of thousands of people kind of a day through these economies already, and I think that's a good start. We're starting to get into a really good place now. We're seeing I think 100,000 unique buyers every single week or something like that with NFL on just the secondary trading economies, and I think that's the key. I think is that. What we did is we kind of put out a traditional mainstream game, right? There's really no concept of, people aren't having to go create wallets before and all that. All that's handled kind of behind the scenes. You just come into the world and start playing, and you can start accumulating assets. And yes, there's inflection points to where it's like, okay, kind of some friction points where it's like, cool, I'm getting these assets. We try and keep no friction in that. So people are kind of automatically onboarded in the ecosystem. But as they want to do more advanced things, they can, right? They can start selling tokens and cashing out and all these other kind of crazy things they can do. And what it's allowed us to do is I think we've had 6.5 million people now come into the NFL Rivals game, which is awesome. And then from that, we've had, about 20% of them have created these kind of real wallets. So we kind of start off on a guest wallet, kind of not a real wallet because it's not really tied back to any ownership yet, but you are accumulating assets, and at some point you can convert that. And we've seen 20% plus have kind of converted into that full wallet structure. So we love the fact that we've kind of been able to slowly onboard people into the ecosystem, right? And I think that's worked really, really well. I think some other stats that I love around that game is, we were up against an incumbent in the NFL genre, right? NFL football genre that's been around for 35, 36 years. And that's not an easy task to go up against such a big brand like Madden. And what I do love is that, when we came out with the game, people were like, oh, people are going to hate this. People hate NFTs. People hate tokens. I mean, to be super honest, there's a lot of NFTs and token stuff I hate, so I get that sentiment to some degree. But I think it's like, if you do it right and you do it seamlessly and you do it with value, no one's, it's going to be a positive experience for gamers. And I think what's really cool is if you go to the app stores right now, go to iOS App Store, Madden's sitting at a 4.7 star rating and Mythical's sitting at a 4.8 star rating. So we've actually been able to even edge slightly Madden on real user ratings. And that's several 100,000 reviews, right? So I think we've been able to seamlessly kind of build that in. And now it's just really about building great game economies that have staying power, right? And so I think that's been an exciting part. We've also had a lot of interesting challenges with NFL this year because we did something very different than most sports games. Most sports games, they literally turn over. It's an annual title, right? So if I had Patrick Mahomes last year in Madden, this year I start fresh and I have to build that lineup all over again and collect those assets all over again. And what we've done is try to kind of build that with a living economy, right? We want these assets. We're not throwing away your digital collectibles that you own from last year for a whole new set. We're basically letting them kind of live year to year to year. And it's been really interesting. It's been, I give ourselves kind of maybe a B- this year, because there's always these concepts of kind of power creep or power inflation that we had to deal with, of how do you make sure that people that are already in the economies are feeling good about their assets while also not overwhelming new players that might be entering the economy, which are equally important. So there's definitely new challenges, I think, that we see with these economies, but it's working quite well. And I think the last set I'll leave you with the game is that the year one, we saw about 80% of that revenue from NFL Rivals came from primary revenue, right? So it came from traditional game revenues, in-app purchases, battle passes, things like that. 20% came from trading fees, right? So 20% of the overall revenue for that game came from people trading economies and fees that resulted out of that. In year two, 35% of the revenue came from in-app purchases. 65%, over half the revenue, John, came from Web3 trading fees. And to me, that was really powerful. And we know exactly why I did it. We added things like quick trade. We added things like crafting recipes, things like that really kind of had people in that trading economy much heavier in year two than year one. But it's been really, really exciting to see that growth.
Yeah, I'm glad you highlighted those numbers, because I think that for our audience on this stream, which is mostly game developers and people in the industry, it's important to understand some of the numbers that can actually happen in the business side of your game. So first of all, a lot of people are going to naturally compare Web3 kind of in-game economies to what they're most familiar with, which is going to be free-to-play games. That's kind of where my background came from. I ran a studio called Disruptor Beam, and we had licenses for like Game of Thrones and Star Trek and stuff like that. And it was totally free-to-play, although we built a blockchain version of Star Trek early on. But when you talk about 100,000 people engaging in essentially the money economy of the game, that's a pretty significant number. If we look at the average successful free-to-play game is somewhere in like the 2 to 3% of the audience will end up making actual purchases. And by the way, it's not 2 to 3% on average. The average in the industry is probably way less than 1%, because the vast majority of free-to-play games are not in any way successful. But like a good successful game is 2 to 3%, which means your audience has to be many millions of players in a week actively engaged before you're ever going to hit like 100K. So first of all, that number is really interesting. And it goes along with this other stat that you just provided, which is this metric around how early on the earlier versions of NFL Rivals, it was mostly kind of mapping to traditional free-to-play in the sense of the 80% coming through those traditional mechanisms, if I understand. But now as the game has grown, you've added more of these sort of open transaction features like quick trade and whatnot. Now most of the revenue is being contributed from the market economy, the Web3 economy, so to speak. That's really interesting.
So let me share two more things again, and because this is great, John, because usually we talk about things from a Web3 perspective and what's it doing for Web3, and I love talking. Frankly, we've been in the industry for a long time. I love talking about what does it mean for game developers. Like, why as game developers do we give a shit? Frankly, well, two things I think are really fascinating. So again, I'm going to go back and compare us against the incumbent, right? So if you look at ARPDAO, right, we look at ARPDAO and you guys look at ARPDAO, every free-to-play game is really watching ARPDAO very closely, right? And what's really interesting is we have two ARPDAOs, right? We have average revenue from primary and average revenue from secondary. What's really fascinating is that if you compare NFL Rivals to Madden, our ARPDAO from primaries are pretty similar. Like, we haven't completely shifted how much money we're getting out of the consumers from the primary, but we've done a great job. We're happy that we're competitive with a Madden. I think we're just slightly behind them maybe, but we're very, very close on the primary. But then we have all this ARPDAO now from secondary, right? And when you total those ARPDAOs together, we're making a lot more money overall per player in the economy, right? That's really fascinating from a game developer perspective, right? It's like, cool, our game, it's not like it's a great game, but it's not like it revolutionized the primary sales index, right? It's like it's still the same kind of metrics that we've seen from other games, which is great and it's competitive, but suddenly we have this new leverage point, right? And that's really interesting too, because I think what a lot of games do now is they try and get to kind of eke out additional ARPDAO. A lot of people throw ads at people, which is fine. It works. Some games make a lot of money from ads on there. To me, it's a little disruptive. If you think about it, you're kind of sending people out of your ecosystem to another game, right? So it's kind of like that works, which is awesome, but there's got to be another way, right? And I think that's what's really interesting about Web3 for us is we have another way, right? And here's the other point that I think is absolutely phenomenal for us is from the quick trade system, right? So with quick trade, if you think about quick trade, what we've done is that we've really married traditional peer-to-peer trading systems that we've seen for decades in games with this concept of Web3, right? So if you think about it, gamers are not thinking about bids and ask and floor prices and collection values and all that of digital assets. What they think about is two panels. This is what I want, and this is what I'll give you, right? Every game, Baldur's Gate 3 just came out. It has the same thing. This is what I want from a merchant. This is what I'll give you. And it could be, it could be with an NPC. It could be with another player. That's kind of the mechanic. We've always seen that. So players think in terms of liquidity, right? I want these and I'll get rid of these. So what we've done is we've married those two systems together. And that's been an enormous change for us and something we're going to go very deep into this year. We have I can even preview a couple things we're working on right now. But what that starts doing now is it says, cool, I want Patrick Mahomes. Patrick Mahomes might be selling for $400 in the secondary market. There's still very few consumers, even in the US, I think that are going to put $400 on a credit card or have $400 of crypto to spend on that. There's a lot of them, right? There's whales and things like that, just like every other game. But the average consumer is not going to do that. But what we found is if you put a button that says, hey, I'll trade for that. And when I hit trade, it shows up in that left panel. And in the right panel are all of my other digital assets, right? And because our tech has an open order book, right? Again, at any given second, I think we have 50,000 open orders for NFL Rivals. So we can price almost every single item in real time, and we can fund that deal right in real time. So I see all my digital items, and I start checking off items maybe I don't want. Maybe there's 5 items I don't want anymore, and as I select them, they're real time priced. And it's suddenly you're like, oh, $500. Now I can hit trade. I received the Mahomes. I got rid of the other five assets, like a game, like a game trading system. I got what I wanted. I got rid of what I didn't want. No money exchanged hands. I didn't put anything on my credit card. But what actually happened behind the scenes is we real-time bought from one seller somewhere in the world, and we real-time sold to those five different buyers potentially somewhere in the world. So we ended up generating trade transaction fees on 6 different transactions on a free trade from the consumer. So why is that important? Well, one, we're now monetizing non-paying players. I might have never pulled out my credit card. I might not have any cash systems in the game, but I'm earning items in the game and I've been able to transact with other people around the world. So that's very, very significant as you're able to monetize non-paying players through this mechanism of Web3. Second is you're actually starting to mix cohorts from all over the world in real time, right? You might have somebody in there that's a collector. You might have a couple whales. You might have someone that is speculating on an asset in some other country, right? You're able in one atomic transaction, all in real time, all secured by the chain, you're able to mix all those traders in one step. And that, I think, is absolutely powerful of where this goes, right? We've always had this concept of like, I want to start with a thimble in the game and trade my way up to the Lamborghini, right? And there's ways you can do that now, and you can do that without spending money while you're generating revenue for the ecosystem, right? That to me is the powerful part of what Web3 can do. It's not about the tokens and wallets and all that stuff. It's really about there's a new way to engage users with each other that actually generates a better experience, more engagement, and more revenue back to the game itself.
So there's a couple areas of innovation here that I think are really interesting. One is sort of the technological aspect that you talked about, the ability to combine different cohorts and engage them in the trading economy. But there's almost a deeper design question that suggests a mindset shift. So right now we're still in an industry where most revenue is actually like free to play, mostly mobile, and I did that, and a lot of our customers do that. So I understand how design works in this space, which is you create a compulsion loop and you create pinch points, and at those pinch points, the player really, really wants to monetize, and that's when you get paid. And then you try to repeat that as long as you can for that customer who's willing to pay. It's a proven model that totally works for 100 billion plus of revenue per year in our industry, but it does suggest a certain kind of design. It means the designers are always chasing that next pinch point, that next monetization point in the game. And of course, the game economy always shifts the way you can actually think about game design and game systems and whatnot. It feels like in NFL Rivals, there's a bit of a shift going on, which is it becomes less about those pinch points and more about the value of ownership and wanting to actually own things. And it's actually important for you as the operator of the game to have that value in the economy, because if a lot of your revenue is going to come from the trading, then if that economy implodes, then you're not succeeding either. So you're kind of aligned with the players of the game to make the overall experience very successful from that standpoint. So I'm just curious if you thought much about like that shift from a design player engagement standpoint and just how kind of the bones of the game change when you think about it that way.
Yeah, no, we think a ton about this. Yeah, absolutely. So I'd say a couple things. It really kind of depends a little bit on the game, John, right? So some games, I think this game, the concept works in a majority of games, especially anything multiplayer, anything you're peacocking or vanity is great. Anything you're collecting, you can apply these type of economic models to. Also, UGC is a little bit different too. If you have a very heavy UGC game, there's another big opportunity there. I mean, I think the same tech stack works beautifully for a creator economy, right? Letting people come in and creating their own resources. But I think there's one key here, right? The key piece around this when you're designing these economies is scarcity, right? And scarcity is a tricky one, right? Because you basically you can't have it too scarce, right? In fact, my former creative director at Activision on Call of Duty, we played Hearthstone. We were there when Hearthstone was kind of going crazy, and he collected card backs. And I remember at one point he was avid player. He played like crazy. And at one point there was a card back that Blizzard had released that was to some local BlizzCon or something like that. And he had no opportunity to collect that. And he stopped playing the game because he's just like, there's no way I can ever get that card now. I can never be a completionist, and I'm done, right? So there's all these, it depends on the game of how you do it. But I think scarcity is really powerful. And I think the way we view scarcity is really in two mechanisms, right? It's either time-based or quantity-based. And I'd say we lean a lot heavier into time-based, right? Same Fortnite does the same thing, right? What's interesting about like a game like Fortnite, they do the same mechanics, right? You can get this during this season, and then after the season, you can't, right? That is time-based scarcity. And what happens, and even games like Fortnite, is people are selling free Fortnite accounts on eBay. Why would you buy a free Fortnite account on eBay? Well, I missed season 2 to get the DJ Marshmallow skin 2 years ago, and it has value to me. So time-based assets and quantity, scarcity in digital assets have natural value to consumers. That, I think, is the important part. There's always, if you can't get it, somebody's going to want it, right? And I think that's actually we've seen this in Call of Duty. We've seen this in every game, right? And what this does is it starts letting you, if I did have it, I now have value, right? That that somebody else could take, kind of extract from me if they wanted to in the future. And the other thing it does too, which I think is even more important, I think a lot of Web3 kind of companies get this wrong, is that to me, it's not, everybody talks about, oh, it's about profiting, ownership and profit. I don't really think it is. I think, yes, profit's definitely part of it, right? People can come out. I think it's the consumer behaviors. I have control. I think it's more about I have control of what I do. And I have value creation on what I'm doing, right? So here's an example. We had a Travis Kelce event. We had these cards called Mythical. Every one of our games, there's kind of mythical tiered assets. And what a mythical tiered asset is it's something we don't sell. We will never sell a mythical tiered asset. There's only 2 ways you can get a mythical tiered asset in any of our games that we produce, right? We develop. One is you earn it in the game. 2, you buy it from someone that earned it in the game. That's it. There's no way to buy those assets other than that, right? And those assets have a tendency to be the most valuable in our game, right? Something we never sold, something that was only driven by the consumers. What's interesting about that is if you got a limited 1 of 100 Travis Kelce out of millions of players, those things might go for $1,200, $1,500. We didn't see all 100 holders of those rush out to profit from that. They didn't all go immediately try and sell it. What we did see a lot of is people refer to saying, wow, my collection just went up by $1,200. My digital identity just increased based on what the community is valuing this asset at. That is an important psychology of what we've seen, right? It goes with peacocking. Why do you want the flaming gun? Because you want other people to think you're cool, right? You want other people to feel like you have something that somebody else doesn't have. And I think these open economies really lend itself beautifully to kind of player psychology. It's like, cool, community owns it. And maybe down the road, the community doesn't value that asset anymore. Maybe it's only worth $300 or $50 or whatever it is. But we're not controlling that. We're game developers not controlling that. We're literally controlling putting it out there and letting the community drive it from there. And I think those are very powerful mechanisms, right? Same thing with creator economy. If you let people come in and create their own items, this kind of amazing ecosystem starts to develop, right? People figure out, okay, do I want to do a low-priced item that's a high volume? Do I want to do a high price at low volume? What does that happen? And you start letting different groups come out. It's how the whole retail world works too, right? You have some clothing companies that are mass producing at a lower cost and lower profit margin. You have some that keep a very limited supply and have a big brand behind them and can charge a lot more. Same thing that starts happening in digital assets as well. Web3 kind of makes all this happen, right? You put the rails down for all of these new kind of economic experiments to start happening. And that's what we love. That's what we love about where we're going.
So much innovation coming out of the games that you're working on, John. And I want to actually expand the picture a little bit here. So I want you to start thinking about like more broadly for like what I see as like a publishing ecosystem that you're building. There's Mythos, your own chain. I'm not sure whether you call it a chain or a protocol. I want to talk about that. I want to talk about some of the stuff you're doing in social. You're doing stuff even with cloud streaming technology, which is really interesting, or I think more accurately, GPU command streaming. So I want to be able to get to all of that in the short amount of time that we've got remaining here. But quick station identification. So if you're tuning in, we are here in a live chat with John Linden, the CEO of Mythical Games. I'm Jon Radoff, the CEO of Beamable. We're talking about Web3 game development. So this is for an industry audience, but hey, if you're someone who just wants to tune in and gain some alpha, learn what's coming down the pipe, you're welcome to be part of the conversation too. But it's a live conversation, so post your comments. You've got one of the leaders in Web3 here right now, so don't miss the opportunity to chat. But if you're watching this in replay later, remember that you should tune in when we do this live because you can actually sit in on these conversations. Also, you could join the chat live. You could be, if you got a camera, look at the little ticker on the bottom of the page. Oscar will send you a StreamYard link. You can join. So, okay, John, let's talk about the big picture here. So we just spent a bunch of time on your games and how it's affecting game economies from the bones on up and trading and sort of the bigger picture opportunities around Web3. A lot of people talk about all this pie in the sky stuff, frankly, in Web3, but you've actually delivered a lot of this at scale with millions of players. You're also working on things that could impact the whole gaming ecosystem. Let me just kind of turn it over to you and kind of address that however you want. Like, what is this going to do for the average game developer in the future?
Yeah, so I think what's interesting, John, if you look historically at the game industry, right, there's been big momentum shifts, right? You've covered one already. Free to play was massive. That was a massive paradigm shift for the game industry, right? We now have nearly half the world's population playing these games every single month, right? That was tremendous of what happened there. UGC, we talked a little bit about UGC. That was a tremendous paradigm shift. We now have more content than one studio could ever make, right? Because everybody's contributing. But on top of that, we now have new stakeholders that actually care about the economics of the game because they're contributing their time, their skill, their effort into these game economies. And to me, that's fascinating, right? So those have been permanent shifts, I think, in our industry. I honestly think we're in the midst of the next 3 shifts, right? And I think they're all fairly related, which is really, really cool, right? So the concept of ownership, the concept of expressing digital identity, that's the one we've been focused on, right? And I think that's when we're making good progress. We'll have, I think last year we had nearly $400 million of digital assets traded through our tech. So that was great. I mean, we're closing on $500 million. This year we'll be well over $500 million in assets traded. So I think we're making good progress there. I think eventually we'll see multiple billions very easily, right? Steam has kind of been doing this to some degree for a long time, right? They've been doing billions of dollars of transaction value, but they do it in a closed ecosystem, right? So you're under their rules and you're under what they decide. And I think to truly do this on a global basis, I think you start opening that up, right? And I think that's where the power of Web3 goes. So that's been kind of our focus. We are thinking very much around that social experience, right? There's so many things that you think about it. When you take a game that actually becomes very successful, what's really funny, John, is the more successful your game, the more fragmented that world becomes, right? Suddenly social's going to Twitch, it's going to X, it's going to different things over here. I'm sorry, it's going to Discord and all that. Streaming's going to YouTube, it's going to Twitch. You have esports now are branching off into other tournaments, which is great, but it starts fragmenting that ecosystem. And I think where we start seeing social happen, I think you start seeing this all pulled back together, right? To where you have Web3 becomes the rails to start unifying all this, right? So when you have an economy, and I'm not saying there's one master currency or one master token, but when you have interoperable tokens that you can kind of quickly move around, or assets you can quickly move around, now you start unifying these ecosystems, and I think we start seeing a multiplying effect. So we are working on a big social app right now. That's very, very focused. If you're okay with me saying it, Beamable is also going to be involved in this. Okay, so we're excited about that through the Mythos Foundation. So again, this is not necessarily a mythical product, but through the Mythos Foundation and what we're setting up there, this is exactly Beamable joining Mythos is exactly what I was hoping for, John. Like, this is exactly the type of thing. You guys see the power. You guys have amazing skill sets, and you have an amazing product. How do we start bringing those all together and making them interoperable, right? To where we can start unifying these ecosystems, because I think we'll see massive growth as a gaming industry as we start unifying these opportunities, right? So social is a big one we're thinking about. You mentioned cloud gaming. I'm a big believer in where that goes. I'd say that's probably a 2026 product for us. We did acquire a company 2 years ago that had a really, really amazing product. And I'll do a quick 10 seconds, I guess, on streaming. If you think about audio right now, if a consumer wants audio, it's on demand. If you want linear video, it's on demand. You want a video game, you have to go download 80 gigabytes to your hard drive and hope you have enough room. And every time you go into the game, it downloads another 2 gigabytes to your local machine, right? Gaming should eventually be on demand. And you can start doing really cool stuff if you can do that on demand. You can start interconnecting 3D worlds. You can start having all of these new almost distribution and new business development opportunities, even between companies. So I really firmly believe in that. There's a lot of technical challenges there, though. And so we have a great piece of tech there. I think you're the first one to ever call it right, the GPU command streaming. Well done. I've never heard anybody refer to it as that. That's awesome. That's exactly what it is. And it starts, I think that tech is amazing on its own. But when you start connecting digital identity and currencies and assets and start flowing through that, people talk about the metaverse, right? I don't think the metaverse is going to be one system. I don't think it's Roblox. I don't think it's Fortnite. I think the metaverse is a 3D interconnected world, right? It's the web, but in 3D. And what makes the web so powerful is I can literally go from Amazon.com on one set of tech to Microsoft.com on another set of tech, and it all works, right? I have that interoperability built in, and I think we'll see that eventually in 3D, whether you're on Unity or Unreal, or rolling your own game engine, we can start interconnecting those, and Web3 does become the rails. So those are the three things we think are really powerful. We think it's a pretty powerful trifecta of tech too. And that's where Mythos is really trying to basically push a lot of that. We've been helping out on the marketplace side. The Mythos chain is a chain that's made for gaming. It also happens to be the #1 in transaction volume in the world now. So we do more What's amazing is Mythos chain now, if you checked out the stats, it's like mythos.foundation/analytics, all public data. It does more transaction volume, more NFT transfers, right, per month than all the other top 9 chains combined. So it's really, so #2 to #10 combined transaction volume is less than what Mythos is doing. That's the power of the gamer, right? They're not worried about ebbs and flows and what are crypto prices and all that. They're just here to play and they're here to have fun, right? And I think that's what's powerful about gaming. So I know I threw a lot at you there, but we see a lot happen.
All right, there's a ton to unpack from that. I love that you're focused on actual stats. We do the same thing at Beamable. We're starting to talk more about the decentralized physical infrastructure network that we're rolling out. That's what I'm here at Eth Denver to talk about. And one of the stats we like to share is that when we launch this thing, we're going to be we'll be like a top 10 DPIN project by revenue, not by like some made up vanity metric, but the actual revenue flowing through the network. Probably actually closer to #2 or 3, but we're just trying to manage expectations somewhat because we can't tell what the market will look like a few months from now when we launch. But yeah, this hopefully is the year of actual substance behind Web3 projects, because a lot of these purely aspirational things, are now struggling for capital and attention. And I think people are just fed up with that. They want stuff that really works and can really scale. Oscar, I don't know if you have that video you can share of the GPU command streaming and how that connects worlds together. It's really neat. So here's I'll just comment on what I think is interesting about it. You used the word metaverse. I was a little surprised that you rolled out that word. It's gotten a little bit tired, but I still have a channel called Building the Metaverse, which some people are probably watching on YouTube right now. So that's cool. To me, a big part of metaverse is this idea of social connectivity. And like version 1 of that was like BattleNet and presence detection, and the fact that you could see your friend playing StarCraft while you're playing World of Warcraft, for example. But there was still a lot of, coming out of the game, coming back to BattleNet, switching. Like it wasn't that permeable to be able to actually transition between environments. Now, cloud streaming, or GPU command streaming in your case, has the ability to actually deliver the graphics of like what a world looks like through your computer, because you no longer have to build the whole 3D environment on the front end. For people that aren't deep into like 3D graphics tech, it's really, really hard to have one 3D world environment where it looks one way, built for one world, and then you look in a different direction and it's a completely different world. Just rendering that 3D environment locally on your computer is pretty well beyond like what we can do with current technology. But streaming actually solves for that, because you can surface it essentially as a video, so to speak, through the windows and the portals that interconnect to the universe. And I thought that was a really interesting way to think about the role of cloud streaming in the quote unquote metaverse, because then you combine the social graph with the ability to actually jump with your friends between worlds. Like Roblox is probably the closest to it so far in that, but it's still like a disconnected environment, but you can bring your friends along with you if you talk about what you want to do next. Now you can actually portal together into a different environment.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting is, I mean, cloud gaming works right now, but there's 2 major flaws with cloud gaming. One is that it requires a GPU in the cloud, and GPUs can't be shared, right? So you're having an inefficiency problem, right? 1 GPU per 1 connected player. So I want 1 million players in my game right now, or my series of games right now. I need 1 million GPUs in the cloud. So basically, what this does is it shifts it back to CPU and uses your local GPU to do the heavy lifting, right? And it works, which is great. And so from that, the other thing too is you can't buffer very well with games, right? Like linear video, you can buffer ahead. You know what the next frames are going to be, and you can kind of compress that and buffer that. In gaming, it's hard to do that because you can't really buffer free will. You don't know where they're going next or what they're doing next, right? Or what's going to happen dynamically in the feed. So this is let's show the video real quick here. This is a quick video setting up real quick. This is a Unity game. Actually, I think I narrated. Let me talk in the video here. I think it narrates itself.
So what this is going to show you is you're going to see our game. You're going to see our Blankos game in Unity. And inside that game, there's going to be a portal that opens. And it's a different game on a different game engine. And watch how seamless it is to move between these. So, yeah. So I have my desktop, 5 megabyte loader, about 3 seconds, and I'm in the game, fully in the game. So now I'm streaming the game from a cold start, nothing installed on the machine. I can stream the entire Blankos game. So as I go into the game, 5 definition, 1080p, running through this about 3 or 4 megabits a second. So as I'm running through this junction here, we added a little demo into this called Portals. So again, this is a Unity game, about 8 gigabytes to download. When I turn around, you're going to see a portal appear, and inside that, you're going to see an Unreal 4 game running live inside of Unity. But not only that, I can walk through that portal, and I'm instantly in the other game and controlling that game. So I literally walk from one game to another game, from a different one game engine to another game engine completely seamlessly. So now I'm in Unreal 4. I'm running around. We even kind of play around with interoperability. You'll see the Billy Bones jacket. I'm now in Unreal 4. I see a Unity game running. It's a Lego-style game running in the background here. I can walk up to this portal. You can see it running. I'm going to run through that portal, and I'm in a third game. Nothing installed in this machine. So I've literally moved from company to company without ever installing anything on my local machine. So we think this is really, really cool, right? So why is this pretty interesting? Well, I think you start connecting companies together. Also, I think Web3 becomes really, really critical because that becomes your identity. That becomes your wallet. That becomes your assets transfer as you move between these worlds. So we have some of the
Perfect. So actually being stuff there, that's exactly what I was going to say. I think the cool thing, the tech is cool. I mean, the tech is cool, and the opportunities of what we can do with that are awesome, right? Now, you might say, like, why would you want to move from game to game? Well, there's a lot of reasons, right? I mean, think about multiple games. Think about toy companies out there, right, that have all of these IPs. They could start building their own framework. And imagine this, John, like, you have the big companies like the Mattels and the Hasbros and all that out there. They can now, they don't have to build everything in Roblox. They don't have to build everything in even one programming language, right? They can use Web3 as that identity and the currency, and they can literally move between projects that other game developers are all building together. You can go from a Barbie world to a Hot Wheels world, and all of this starts becoming interoperable. And I do think, without a question in my mind, this will be the future of gaming, right? And Web3 is super critical to move that identity, to give the players the ownership over what's happening, giving decentralized social graphs, giving decentralized wallet systems, the things you're doing too, the decentralized services behind the scenes. That's the new piping for the whole next generation of games. And I love this demo because usually I show this to like Web3 people and they're like, that looks kind of cool. I'm like, this is really cool, guys. This is like really cool stuff. And you know what's cool about that is just what I said, is this will be the future of games. We're not there yet. It's going to take some stepping points to get there, but frankly, the whole Mythos setup is for companies like Beamable, companies like Mythical to start coming together and figuring out how do we basically build this next world of compute, really, for what we think will be the new interactive experiences.
Yeah, I think sometimes when we talk to, I'll say this lovingly, but the grognards of our own industry, and you talk about metaverse and interoperability and interconnecting these experiences, I'll frequently hear things like, oh, well, you know, Blizzard's never going to let me take an item from World of Warcraft into Riot's game, League of Legends. I'm like, okay, sure, you're probably right, but like, let's take a look at what's happening in Roblox. Roblox is probably the biggest number of users of anything. Well, Minecraft, I guess, is probably the actual largest, but both of them are good examples. Minecraft and Roblox are examples where people play them. They take their friends groups with them as they jump between different worlds and explore different experiences. In Roblox, you even have some amount of assets that are taken between things. So, you know, we already have the existence proof that players do want to engage in this way. You just need probably a lot more scale, and the tech is really hard. So like I think probably the challenges of like interoperability and getting your streaming platform working for GPU command streaming across all the different platforms, I can only imagine like the complexity of that, which is probably why it's still a little bit more in the future. But maybe we can
go ahead.
Yeah, but maybe we can dial it into like the here and now, because it starts with maybe some of that social infrastructure too. So this is why I'm super excited for the industry overall, but also just it's always been like my pet project to try to figure out how can you decentralize the social graphs in gaming, because that is a huge opportunity for game developers. When you decentralize the social graph, what you're effectively doing is you're decreasing the friction that players have for adopting new games, bringing their guilds with them, bringing their identity with them, instead of being locked into a silo like Battle.net or Steam or the various platforms that are out there. So this is something that truly benefits everyone. So I'm really excited that you're taking the charge on that, because again, huge project, hard to do well, and needs a lot of infrastructure. That's where Beamable comes in to help you guys build this. And yeah, we announced just yesterday, like the support we're going to have around Mythos and all that other ecosystem level stuff. And we didn't quite announce exactly the form that the social tech would take, but that's the sort of things we're talking about there.
That's exactly right. And I think you're right. I think we start off, what I love about where we're heading with this and heading this with Beamable is things like, hey, we do have a game with millions of players, and I think we have 2 new games, one here and one down there, that are coming out that I think will have tens of millions apiece, right? So now we're starting to mass a couple great groups there. There's other ecosystems around the world. There's one in Asia for sure that we've been talking to, right? There's a traditional game company we've been talking to that have all of these ecosystems. Now you're talking 100 million plus consumers, right? So how do we basically take a new kind of social experience that truly is integrated to go from game into social back into the game, right? Having that flow of game to social to game to social. And I think that's going to be really exciting. There are things like Marketplace. There's things like tournament structures you can start doing, letting people throw their own tournaments, people throw their own live events, right? Those types of things can happen. Having wallet management, right? If I have a currency or a series of currencies, how do I have access to them? How do I move them across? And I think a couple things we've been thinking about, obviously, is things like quick trade, right? So quick trade, we would probably never in an NFL game ever let you trade for assets. You mentioned the World of Warcraft coming into another game. You're right. From a creative, I don't know too many creative directors that'll be like, yeah, sure, just bring those assets into my game, right? Like, creative directors. I know creative directors. That shit's not happening, man. Like, it's just there's, it's a very, because it is an art, right? People have built these worlds. They spend so much time building these worlds. They want certain parameters, but some of them will. There will be cases where that would work. There could be cases using AI production to morph that sword into something new that fits the art style of the other world, right? That is not too far out to be able to say, cool, I do own this. And this game B's like, yeah, I will honor that in my game, but it's going to turn into this item, right? But there's also things you can do now around loyalty, right? If you have this, we're going to give you this, because there's a whole new analytics around, I know what the value of this. I know, and you can even see, this is where the blockchain becomes interesting. I'll go back to our guys. If I have a Patrick Mahomes card, I can tell pretty quick from the chain, did I earn it or did I buy it from somebody that earned it? Both those are signals for me as a developer, right? If they earned it, they're spending a ton of time in the game. They are grinding that game because we kind of know what that means. If they bought it from somebody, they're probably a collector, or they're a more whale mentality, right? So there's a lot of really interesting data that I think people will be able to share. Now, there's a lot of the bigger groups right now that the walled gardens don't want that data out there, but I think it ultimately just helps the industry in general. If you think of the macroeconomics of where this goes, you want to truly open up the creator economy. You want to do it. I think the walls have to come down. I think you have to keep it open. And yes, it's going to be disruptive to some degree. Some people will figure out how to use data from a blockchain to craft what their demographic and what they want. That's okay. That's great, because it's going to open up new doors. So I've had a lot of people say, why the hell would somebody want to link somebody else's game? Well, it could be multiple experiences within that. Think about like a digital mall, right? There's like digital malls where people can kind of jump, and you don't have to be having everybody build their experience in your engine by these rules. They just build an experience and link them together, right? So I think all of this is definitely coming. And I think it becomes, when you start putting these pieces in place, the way I kind of view it is that we've all put down kind of a piece of the puzzle, right? And we're working on putting the second piece of the puzzle that's touching it. By the time you put down that third piece, it's going to be like, oh crap, now I see why this all came together, right? And I think that's the way we're thinking about it. And frankly, we want to keep that open. We want companies like Beamable. We want other companies that have been joining us recently. We haven't quite announced yet, into Mythos, that are joining Mythos in progress right now. We want everybody to be working together. And I think that really does move where we're going as an industry.
Hey, one thing, I just got this comment. I thought you guys might want to address it from Nowbacks. This is a really cool feature, but if it's just about wandering between Sandbox and Illuvium, to exaggerate a bit, then I don't think I need to argue further. Web3 is seriously lacking in major hits.
Completely agree.
What do you think?
Yeah, I think right now, I think there's two things. I think Web3 has done a couple things that are really fascinating. One, if you take what Ronan and those guys did with Axie, I think there's some really cool stuff that came out of that. You literally had third world countries that are making living in games. That's pretty cool. I'm not saying that's the right model. I'm not saying play to earn is the next thing that's going to take over the entire global economy, but it is a really cool experiment to see that people actually, and they became stakeholders, right? It's really about the mental shift of like, this means something now to me, right? I'm a stakeholder in that economy. So I think that was a really interesting thing that happened in Web3, and we'll see more of that. We're seeing some new games. I think some of the games that are really catering to $20,000, $30,000 assets, you've already kind of lost the mainstream at that point, right? I think you really have to have something that's open. Our average transaction is $20, right? On chain, right? These are consumer prices, consumer friendly prices, and I think so there's a lot of Web3 games. I think they're going community first, which is a little scary because, John, as you know too, most games will fail. Most games fail. And if you're building a community first and everybody's really excited and a stakeholder in this economy, they got to understand they're a VC for a game, and VCs generally fail, right? 9 out of 10 of them will fail. They will lose their money. And that's not a super friendly mentality right now, I think, with the crypto audience. So I think we got to be careful around what we're doing there. But I do think the concept of the tech, the concept of the principles of Web3 are absolutely the right thing to take the industry forward.
Yeah. Oscar dug up an article I wrote for A16Z a couple of years back about digital identity. And, it used to be that your identity was owned by you online.
Yep.
And basically the last 15 years or so, at the advent of social networks, it's been a lot of siloed companies trying to own your identity and monetize it primarily through advertising or being the channel through which you buy things. So
yep.
This is a return to the way the internet was meant to be. Like, the domain name system is decentralized. Yep. No one company owns the domain name for your website, for example, or your email address can be anywhere. So the more interoperable and decentralized those things are, the better it is for the ecosystem overall. Maybe it's not as great for individual siloed players or siloed institutions that want to own everything, but for the average developer to have that seamlessness both between experience as well as your social identity is really a game changer. The comment that was made a little while ago, points well taken. You need a lot of usage behind these kind of social graphs, and that is where Web3 has struggled a little bit on even some of the newer things like Farcaster, for example. I think it's a great product in terms of conceptually, but the users on it is just so much smaller than even a newer platform like Blue Sky, for example.
Yep.
So in gaming, the people who've been most successful at this, they had hits, they had games with a lot of traffic. Like the metaverse vision that at least was publicly articulated at Epic, for example, came because Fortnite was so successful. It wasn't, hey, let's build a. I think Tim always had this idea, so I don't want to make it sound like he came up with it because Fortnite was successful. The guy's been thinking about this stuff for a long time. But I think what made it credible was that they sort of didn't put the cart before the horse. They figured out, how are we going to have millions and millions and tens of millions of active players to form the nucleus of that. It was the same even for like siloed social network. Like you could call BattleNet a siloed social network, but again, like there's an awful lot of players on WoW and Diablo and StarCraft and all these games that then gives you that structure around it. So yes, Web3, for it to be a Web3 social network, it's going to require games with a lot of scale. That's kind of where you're getting to. That's kind of the point of the earlier conversation, I guess, though, which is you guys didn't start with one of these airy-fairy metaverse visions saying, let's build the metaverse and a bunch of SDKs for developers, and then like it'll all appear. Like this has been the problem of, I mean, my biggest critique of Web3, and I say this again with love, because I love vision, I love aspirations, I love thinking about like what the future can look like, but there's been far too many projects that are just the aspiration, but with no real idea of how you get from point A to point B, because that's a lot. And just building SDKs does not make developers show up. But believe me, like Beamable, when we first got started 5 years ago, we started with an SDK, and we had to beg people to use the SDK before we could actually prove that it was a good platform to build on. And today we're reaching some real scale in our business. But it's the same for these metaverse things. Like unless you've got a traffic driver that's significant, and in gaming, you got to be talking about millions, if not tens of millions of players is what scale means in this industry, not a few hundred people just messing around looking to see if anyone else is there.
Yeah,
you guys are doing that. I don't know. There aren't really that many other examples in Web3 that are hitting those kind of numbers yet.
There's a few, but yeah, I agree. I think, you know, and I this is one of the better talks I've ever been on, just because we're actually talking it from the game perspective, and I love this. But I agree. I think, you know, I mean, to be real honest, yeah, we took some pages out of the Epic and Valve books, right? I mean, what I think they're two of the most successful companies, definitely in our industry, right? And they're successful for a couple reasons. One, there's kind of two main business models in gaming, and both of them are pretty tough, right? You have a SaaS business model that's purely SaaS, and frankly, it's a hard balance in a SaaS business to extract enough value from the customers that are building value on your products, right? And you guys see that. You know, you have games that are making a ton of money and not paying you probably your fair share, right? That's a tough model though on the SaaS side. Then you have companies on the other side that are just aiming for a hit, and as we know, most games will fail. If you happen to get the hit, it's great days until it's not, right? I mean, even the Epics of the world, they've had some decline in revenue because Fortnite was such a hit, and now it's coming back down a little bit, right? So there's challenges on both sides. What I think Valve and Epic did really, really well is they did a little of both, right? They started off with games. They took the systems that worked well. They started productizing that. Other people started using those products. They would put out additional games that kind of re-productize. And they kind of had this great cycle. And if you hit a big win on the game side, great, you invest that back into the product side, right? And having those products that you can control the levers, right? You can actually optimize it. That's really, really powerful. And I think that's what we've been trying to mimic, is that a lot of people call us a game developer. We're not a game developer. We have Mythical Studios and Mythical Platform. They're all built on the Mythical Platform, right? So we are building a platform, and we're basically empowering Mythos Foundation to move as much tech into that foundation. But we are putting our own games. Sometimes we're putting out games because we can kind of leverage success. Sometimes, we're putting out games to try and further that tech. But I think that's the way to go. And I think companies like I said, companies like Beamable and Mythical coming together, that's where we kind of accelerate this even further. And now we do have this new piece called Mythos that's out there, and we have to make sure we all kind of figure out how does that get the right value and all that. But yeah, I'd say we're in the right spot here. And this is pretty calculated in terms of, we had a game called Blankos. We do want to bring that game back. That game did really well up to about 1.5 million players. And then suddenly we started hitting UA issues, right? To where it's like, man, we're now competing against the GTA 5s in terms of trying to get PC developer or PC gamers into our game. So that was challenging. I think Web3 is about to see that. You know, we saw that 5 years ago. Like, if you're just going PC is great to a point, and then it gets really damn costly fast, right? Unless you're an outlier. So we had that game. It moved the tech forward. Frankly, we learned a lot of stuff not to do with some of the blockchain tech, and we've kind of improved that. We've moved those assets to the new chain, and we're working on a new game that we think can be even bigger on mobile. Like, take the great stuff there and do it again. And to me, what's really interesting about a game like Blankos is that most games, it would be dead, right? You'd be done. Like, hey, we didn't make money on the game. We kind of hit some plateaus on how we can grow that game. Let's just throw that game away, and we'll build another one in 2 years, right? What we're doing is we're like, no, we're keeping all those holders, and we're bringing all that with us into the next version, right? So there is some downtime right now because the game hit some plateaus, but we're going to be bringing that ecosystem. And to me, again, that's the power of Web3, right? I'm not sure the Microsofts or the Activisions or the Take-Twos or anybody else right now would probably keep that community alive and say, yeah, cool, bring everything into the new game. they would probably just destroy that game and say, hey, let's start over with something new. And I think, again, that's the cool stuff we can do with Web3. You bring the community along for the ride, or you can start bonusing. Hey, you have this item and we'll give you something over here, right? So there's all these new mechanisms that come out of this that we couldn't be more excited about where this heads.
You mentioned a bunch of the big game publishers out there. I've just always wondered why these guys can't figure this out in anything beyond their own games. Like I looked at BattleNet for years, and it's like, you guys have everything. You've got the chat system, you've got digital distribution, you've got presence detection. Like if you opened that up, you could be at least as large as Steam. Steam is the one that actually did figure this out, and of course is now quite dominant. Or I talked to Riccatello many times when he was at Unity, and we talked about Origin, kind of the similar thing he built at EA, and it's like, why aren't you doing that at Unity? Like you could be the social graph for all players. Like they couldn't even figure it out there as a development tools company. This is really hard.
Yeah, we do. I think it's really two things in our industry, right? I mean, as you know, it's a brutally competitive industry, right? I mean, I don't think people realize that. I think a lot of people think of, video games, that's fun, let's do that. I'm like, realize the amount of, how difficult and the amount of probably life we've lost building video games. Like it is a very stressful industry, and it's stressful because you could be trying to put out the best thing, and there's just so many failure points along the way, right? So I think what we see, John, right now is we either see companies that are too big, and they don't have an interest in opening it up, right? So the BattleNets and the Epics and the Roblox, why would they open it up? Because they have a big kingdom already, right? And that's natural. I don't think that's anything nefarious. It's just like that's a natural business decision. They have shareholders.
Sure.
Let's protect the golden egg, right? And then you have other companies, frankly, that are struggling. I think they're struggling to get a next hit out. And I think there's literally companies out there. There's publicly traded gaming companies that I think are on the verge of like, are we going to make it? Because like they're just trying to figure out. They have amazing IPs, but they're having to put all their very strategically money into a couple of them because it's so competitive. And I think there's a couple. I mean, frankly, the two companies, I think exactly what you just mentioned, the two companies that have kind of done some of this are Valve and Epic, right? And it's working, but they just have a little different way of doing it, right? Of how they're doing it, which is all great. I think it's to each their own, right? But I think what we're seeing is we think we can start uniting some of these companies. We're going to put hopefully some really big wins, right? We have some great games. We don't have a Fortnite yet, right? I think we don't have our Fortnite. We don't have our Minecraft yet. I think we're getting close, which is awesome. And at that point, I think what we're hoping to do is cool. We are pushing the open dialogue. We are pushing the open piece. If we can get these games like the FIFAs and the Pudgy parties to hit at the levels we think they can hit, great. We now have the foundation. We have Beamable working with us. We have Mythos set up. We have these token setups happening behind the scenes. We have the ability to pay in multiple currencies and virtual currencies and all that. I think we just are waiting for the company to get that big hit. And I think it's coming. So I think it's coming pretty quick. So, and my experience too is that the second that happens, everybody's going to shift, right? I mean, I've gotten calls from the Strausses and the Eves of the world, right? They are definitely aware of what's happening in this industry. They're very much watching, and I'd say they're very much rooting for us, right? Because they have gambles too. They're not going to put crypto into GTA 6 right now because it's too risky. It's their golden egg, right? But I think as soon as this really starts playing out, I would imagine GTA 7 definitely will, and there probably will be parts of GTA 6 that might too, with certain servers or something like that, right? So it's definitely happening. It's just we're a couple big hits away from really exploding. And if you look at the mobile curve too, of when the big studios jumped into mobile, it wasn't now. In the time period of Web3, it wasn't now. Like I remember Activision didn't jump in for a long time. We kind of brute forced our way in. Hearthstone came out with a game. We came out with a game with Skylanders on mobile. We didn't get a lot of support there. We just did it, and it kind of started forcing the hand. And the next thing you know, they bought King, right? So they came in. When they came in hard and quick. And they're still dominant in mobile games, right? But it just takes a while. So I'm very confident all the big studios will eventually be having economies like this in tech like this, for sure.
It seems like that's what the meta of 2025 is for game companies, though, or particularly in Web3, which is we've gone from the purely aspirational, just sort of envisioning the way you want the world to be and then just building stuff for the sake of building it towards that end. That's gotten harder to do. A lot of the capital has dried up in favor of people who are attacking more immediate problems, for better or for worse, by the way. I'm not saying that's even like, that's not like morally good or bad, but just sort of the reality of where we are is you have to sort of have some traction. You have to be building things that are in response to either a problem that a game studio has, or you are satisfying a consumer need at scale that millions of people want to engage in.
Yeah.
And it goes back to that cycle you were referring to earlier. Like, technology doesn't really lead games. The game experience leads games. So you have to start with games, and then you can invest, just as Valve did, for example. Like, Valve built a Half-Life before they could really build out all of Steam. Steam was like their own in-house digital distribution system for Half-Life before it became everything that you think of it as today. Like, they didn't start with, hey, let's build digital distribution and then convince people to sign up for it. Other people had tried that, actually, and not gotten the traction they did. So they had to get...
Where did it come from?
Yeah.
You know, like, there's a game with a very similar name that came from Epic that game engine came from, right? I mean, there's things like that, right? I mean, yeah, exactly. Things come from success, you know, and I think we're getting pretty close to having those successes, and I think that'll spark the next wave here. And I think, you know, where Steam took it to, or where Valve took it to build kind of, you know, this powerhouse of Steam that is closed, and Epic's creating, you know, one of the greatest game engines ever seen that's publicly available, right? With Unreal. We're wanting to do the same thing with these open economies and with social. And I think as we start seeing more success from games like FIFA and Pudgy, and we actually have 4 additional games coming on the platform this year, which is really exciting. As we bring on all these games together, and a lot of them are real developers, like developers that have been in the space. So we're very bullish that as we start seeing that momentum, as we start seeing hundreds of millions of gamers that people can tap into, they're going to tap into it, right? I mean, that's going to happen, you know?
Awesome. Jon, thanks so much for spending the hour here with me. Like, that's a great note to end on. If you're a game developer, build a game that's going to satisfy the needs of millions of people. If you're on the technology side, build the technology that directly helps the people build those games. That's, I think, where you got to be here in 2025. Aspiration's great, but solve real problems, solve real consumer needs, and you'll be in a great space. Jon, thanks so much for taking an hour of your super valuable time to share your vision, your experiences, and how you see things going in this industry over the next couple of years.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Honestly, Jon, this is one of the best conversations I've had about the space in a long time. So thank you very much for the time as well, and we'll talk soon.
All right. And we'll be back again on Web3 Game Development stream next week, 9 a.m. Eastern time on Wednesdays. And we're going to be talking with more Web3 game development studios, technologists, and all of the above. So we'll see you back then. Thanks, Jon. Thanks, Oscar.